All right, so let's go ahead and get started here. Welcome to this month's Agility Learning Lab. This month, we're going to be going over Form Studio basics. This is going to serve as a bit of a tour, demo, intro, I guess, so to speak, of Form Studio. Um, Form Studio is obviously a big piece of our product, right? When it comes to the design tools, there's a lot in Form Studio to learn and to do, and it's a very powerful tool set. We only have an hour today, so we're gonna go kind of like a high level tour to give you an understanding of the generals of what you can do in Form Studio and generally how to do it. And that should help everybody, get a base foundation down, have the tools to go in there and play around with the tool set. You'll know enough to go experiment with Form Studio and learn a little bit more and prepare yourself for if you want, more in-depth training to come to our team and say, okay, I tried that basic stuff. I'm ready for more training. And anybody here that does have Form Studio training, this will serve as a refresher. A lot of parts that you may not use a lot or something that you haven't used in a long time, we'll touch on that today. We're going to touch on every little piece of it so it'll remind you of things. And the biggest part is it'll get that thinking going of, okay, I know I can do this in Form Studio. You might not know exactly the how, and you might not be able to get 100% of the way to point B, but we'll get you somewhere in the middle there where you have that foundational knowledge on how the tool set works. So before we do that, we'll talk a little bit about me. So I'm Chase Linsenbigler. I like to leave my camera on to say hi. So hello, everybody. Thank you for attending today. I'm going to turn my camera off and let you focus on the content here. So what I do here at WiSys is I manage all of our partner enablement. I'm a former customer-facing consultant, and I brought those skills over to the partnership side. And the big reason is we're working to grow a very knowledgeable partner base. We have a lot of great partners, and we want to make sure we get them as many resources as possible to help them become as strong with the tool set as possible. And in doing that, we're working to produce a ton of content for our end users. So if you guys have been following along with us this year, you'll see we have a lot more content on our website and on our YouTube page than we've had in the past. And we're just working to produce anything that can help anyone who uses WiSys, whether that's one of my partners, an end user, a prospect who's interested in using WiSys. We're just trying to create as many tools as we can for you as possible. And a very big part of that are these learning labs. So with the learning labs here, we're doing them on the second Tuesday of each month. And we've done that for the entire year here. And we're going to continue that into 2024. So as of right now, this will be the 12th recording. Again, these are all up on our YouTube page. There's a whole learning lab playlist. We've covered pretty much every piece of the product in some capacity. Obviously, I have more things saved up here for next year, and there's more to talk about on any of these things. We can go deeper on pretty much everything, but there's videos out there on all kinds of different pieces. So I encourage you to go check out what we have up on our YouTube page. And if you want to make sure you're available for these sessions every month, I've been told in the past by some people that they want to make sure they're here for every session. Unfortunately, we only send out an invitation about a week in advance. So if your schedule fills up quickly, it's the second Tuesday of every month, 2:30 to 3:30 EST. If you want to block that off to make sure you have the time available, we'll adhere to that schedule and make sure we're always doing our learning labs at that time. Now, for my partners on the call today, if you're not working with me, I'm a dedicated resource to you guys. Just so you know, the resources that we offer here at WiSys, I can do introduction training with your team, giving you the ins and outs of the product. We can do more in-depth training for the design tools. Today actually kind of falls in between those two, right? It's talking about the design tools, so it's a little more technical than an introduction training, but it's also not getting as deep and in depth with the design tools as I would like. So there's still plenty of room for more advanced training on this subject, but today will get you a foundation to get started. And lastly, I like to try and get standing meetings with as many of my partners as possible too. That way, we can keep a constant line of communication. I can help you, talk through processes for customers or prospects, talk through a tailoring, answer any open WiSys issues you have, things like that. So, if you don't have anything like that on the calendar with me, reach out, set something up. I look forward to working with you guys, and I like to keep those lines of communication open as much as possible with all my partners. So I hope to hear from you guys if I haven't yet. So without further ado, let's get into what we're doing today. So today we're going to do a Form Studio overview. Again, for those of you that missed the very beginning of this call, um, basically this is a high-level tour of Form Studio, the ins and the outs, but it's valuable for everybody, even if you know our product, because we're going to talk about the generals of what you can do in Form Studio. So if you're, familiar with our product, we're going to talk about things that you might never use right now, you might not have realized are there, things like that. And it'll serve as a refresher for you. And then if you're not familiar, this will give you that foundation of, okay, what can I actually do with Form Studio, creating handheld applications? And it'll just build a good foundation so you can learn to think, okay, I can do this in Form Studio. I know generally how. You might need some more help getting there, right? But this gives you that foundation to get started. So we'll start with talking about creating and maintaining projects and handheld applications in Form Studio. There's some important nuances there. So we'll cover that as an intro before we really get started, just to make sure everybody's starting off on the right foot and you have your projects maintained and created in the correct way, that everything will be backed up and safe there in your WiSys system. Then we'll talk a little bit about the user interface of the form, how to adjust it, the different buttons and fields or items that are in the body of the form, and the way to set those up and change them and what everything does there. And then we'll end on handheld actions, and that's going to be the biggest piece of this. Handheld actions is a little bit tricky because there's so much you can do that without a session like this to actually hear, okay, what all is available, a lot of the time people don't realize exactly what all is available, or they might know, okay, I've been told WiSys can do almost anything, right? Because we can. There's a lot of power in these tools. So you hear that simple sentence, right? We can do pretty much anything, but you might not really know how. And today will give you the foundation of, okay, now I know I can do this by using this type of action. You might not be an expert on setting it up yet, but you'll know what's there and what tools are available to you. So I'm going to start by opening up Form Studio here. Actually, let me see here. Okay, so Form Studio, that's FS here, this little icon here in the top corner. If you're on your desktop, that's the icon you're looking for. I always tell people one thing, if you're new to the design tools, we have Design Studio and Form Studio. Design Studio is desktop only applications. Form Studio is all the applications for the handheld. So an easy way to think of it is Design Studio has the little DS on the icon. So you can think DS desktop, right? Now Form Studio, there's no easy trick to it, but you can remember anything you use on the handheld, we call that a form. So Form Studio is where you work on the forms, which are your handheld applications, of course. So we're here in Form Studio, and the first thing you see is we have a list of projects. So any of your out-of-the-box WiSys applications are in here in these agility projects, right? Anything agility here is your standard out-of-the-box WiSys stuff. If you haven't tailored the project at all or the product, and you're just using what was given to you right out of the box in WiSys, what you're using is going to be somewhere inside of here. So everything is managed at the top level as a project, and then those forms, those handheld forms, reside inside of projects. Now, a very important thing to explain here. If I decide, okay, I like this goods receipt form, right? And I use goods receipt, but I want it to look a little bit different. So I actually made a change to this earlier today in practice, right? So if I call this, let's say this was originally called warehouse here, right? So this field said warehouse, not warehouses. And that's how the form looked. Now, if I decided, okay, this looks fine, but I don't like these long words. So I want to change warehouse to be WHS. And maybe I want to change description to be just like DSC, right? I don't like the long words on the screen. I want to try and concatenate these a little bit. I can make those changes, right? Now this form looks the way I want it to look. I made very small changes to the user interface, just to make it shortened, right? Now, in this case, as soon as you run the product updater for WiSys, this is going to be overridden. This will be lost. You will not have this anymore. So that's really where I wanted to start talking today before anybody goes in here and plays around, since I'm giving you the tools to, go experiment in Form Studio. You have to remember, when you're making changes to anything that is out of the box WiSys, which is very common, right? A lot of the time you're going to say, okay, I want this, and what I want is very similar to something that already exists. So I'm going to take the thing that already exists and use that as a starting point, make changes to it, and use that to get me to point B, right? That's very common. That's what you're going to be doing 95% of the time in here. You have to make sure you are making copies of those. As a tailored application, it's going to be its own application, and it's just a copy of the original before you make changes, or else it'll get overridden. And that's because every time you update your WiSys environment, your database, right? Every time you update that, the WiSys projects get updated with it to give you the most current version, right? A lot of the time there's enhancements or bug fixes or whatever. We want you to have the most current version of our out of the box stuff. So all the out of the box stuff gets updated every time you run the updater. So that's the most important place to start. So how do we do that? If we go back to this project screen, you can make a custom project. That's where you'll want to start. You don't want to put anything into those out of the box WiSys projects, because again, those projects get updated. So we start here with new project, and you'll give it a name for whatever you want. If you're a partner, I would typically give this the name of the customer, right? Or maybe if you want to break it up into phases, like customer name phase 1, customer name phase 2. If you're an end user, a customer or a prospect, maybe you want to just call this WiSys tailored apps or something along those lines, but just give it a naming convention that you know what's in there. If you split it up for production and palettes and essentials, you can make it tailored essentials apps, tailored production apps, whatever you want to do. So today I'm going to call this, we'll call this FS Learning Lab. All right. And now I have my FS Learning Lab project in here, and this is where I'm going to start working out of. So you'll see it's completely empty here. There's no applications there on the sides. So now I have my tailored project, nothing out of the box WiSys is in it. And again, just to compare, if I go back into my essentials, you'll see like there's nothing for production or palettes here in essentials, but there's a bunch of applications here under distribution, right? My project is a blank slate, nothing's in there right now. And just so you know too, Agility Essentials is all that essential stuff. There's Agility Production for the production stuff, Agility Palettes for the palette stuff, so on and so forth, right? All right, so now I'm going to go back to my new project, FS Learning Lab. And in here, there's about 3 ways to get you started. So first, I could just add a form or add a view. We'll talk about those options first. So a view is a little bit unique, and that's going to be the least common thing you're going to do when you're getting started in here. So if I click to add a view looks like this. It has a grid. So this grid has SQL that pulls to it, and let's say this is for a BOM, right? Let's say I want a grid to be pulled up on the handheld that just shows me, okay, for a certain parent item, here's the BOM. It would be like line 1. Here's the component item. Here's the quantity for that component item, right? So I could create that in a view here, but a view typically just works from inside of another form. So this would actually be called from, maybe I have a production receipt form. There's a button on it that says BOM. I press that BOM button. It opens up the view, and the view gives me the BOM details. Then I could close this and return to the original form, right? So this is going to be, not as common of a case. You're going to use this typically inside of other things, just to basically display some information on the screen. That's what a view is. Now a form is what you're going to be more accustomed to seeing. This is what you see on the handheld, right? It starts out as a blank space, but here you just see if I add a couple things real quick, now it looks pretty similar to what you typically see on your handheld device, right? Has some fields, has some buttons. This could, actually do transactions in WiSys or SAP or both, right? This is what you're going to be more commonly using is a form. So I could start from scratch. And again, you saw before I added this stuff, that's a completely blank slate. There is nothing to it. There's no actions, no items. These are items up here, no buttons down here. There's nothing, right? You're starting completely from a blank slate. Um, and that's not going to be super common either. Usually, if you're doing something like this, it's because you have a very unique case for your tailored application, right? It's a unique process that you know is different that your company does, and it's not like anything WiSys offers out of the box. That's when I would suggest starting from a blank slate. But a lot of the time, what you're doing is uh, creating a custom process on a form that is just a variation of the processes we already offer. That's what's going to be most common. And for that, going back to what I was saying earlier, you're just going to want to create a copy of something we offer out of the box, because then, we have you maybe 60 to 70% of the way there, right? You have a really good starting point when you make a copy. A lot of the actions, you'll know what the right actions to use are because they're already there. The layout will probably match pretty similarly to what you want. So on and so forth, right? There's a ton of reasons why making a copy saves you a lot of time. It's a very valuable thing. So that's going to be the most common piece. So when we want to make a copy, what we do is we go to copy form here, up here in the top left. And when we click that, we can go to this magnification glass and open that up. And here I have a list of every form that I have on my WiSys, right? So if you look at the project, you'll see like there's projects, like here I have my tailoring a month project. That obviously has nothing to do with out of the box WiSys. Chase test. That's not something that I'm gonna want. That's not out of the box WiSys. So you can easily identify from your projects if something's tailored, or if you were playing around testing something, and that's in there, you'll know what's different and what's out of the box WiSys. So you want to look for these agility projects. Again, agility essentials, agility production, agility palettes. Those are the common ones. And then you can search for the name of the one you want. So let's say I want to do that goods receipt that we were talking about at the beginning. All right, so here's my regular goods receipt, nothing else. That's in agility essentials. So perfect. Double click on that. And now you're going to have to give it a unique name. The reason being, again, the form that's called goods receipt is in the Agility Essentials project. When we run the updater, it knows to update the goods receipt form to the most current version, right? So you have to give your form a new name so it's not, mistaken for that. I mean, I can't even hit OK here, right? I have to give it a new name to be able to proceed because that form already exists. So typically what I would recommend here is especially for my partners, giving it like the initials of the company you're making it for. So I work for WiSys, so I'm going to go WS. Actually, I already did that practicing, so let's just do WYS for WiSys goods receipt. If the customer is Walmart, it's WM or something along those lines. If you're an end user, a customer or prospect, you could give this the initials of your company, or if it's easier for you, you could just call it tailored goods receipt. But you just want to have a name there so okay, this is different from the original, right? Whether it's specific to a certain customer or a specific branch or warehouse that you have, something like that. Just give it a naming convention so you know where it belongs. And I would update the description as well. You want the whole way through, you want that communicated so there's no mistaking this for the original form. All right. And now you'll see here, I have my WYS goods receipt. Now, one thing I want to mention here, you'll see here it still says goods receipt, and on the screen, when you're actually using this on the handheld device, it's going to just say goods receipt. That's because we have a terms ID there. The terms ID allows us to translate this to other languages. When you go in your WiSys settings and say, okay, I want to use Spanish or I want to use Portuguese, that's what tells it how to translate. If you don't need translation, you could clear this out if you want to make sure that it says WYS, so that you're using the tailored application, not the regular. If you need to make sure you know the right name there, you can clear out that terms ID. It doesn't have to stay, but you just got to remember once that's cleared out, okay, language translation isn't going to work on this piece, right? The rest of this could translate if it still has a form. But the title here, that's not gonna change when you change your language if you clear out the terms ID. But now I cleared that out just so it's clear to everybody right now. I'm working on my tailored application here, and now that's set up in the system. So that is the basics of setting up and maintaining your projects and your out of the box forms. That's where we're starting, right? So we went in here, we created our own custom project so that we can, make forms in that custom project that aren't going to be overridden when I run the WiSys updater. So all those forms will be safe here now in my FS Learning Lab project here. I have my form created, WIS goods receipt. It's different than the original goods receipt. It's going to be different. So I want to make sure I give it a different name and, I save it as such. So now it's saved in there, everything's segregated, and none of this will be overridden when I run the product updater. So that's a good place to start. That's where you can begin your Form Studio journey. Now let's talk about actually going in here and making changes. So again, today is to give you an idea of really the easy stuff that you can quickly do, the things that you have the ability to do, the overall, here's the power of Form Studio. Here's all the different types of transactions and actions we can do. Here's all the different types of ways we can edit the user interface of a form, right? We're going to give you that concrete understanding today, but some of the details, like some of this stuff up here that is very important, variables, constants, parameters, settings on certain fields and stuff like that, we're not going to have the time to get in, that deep today. So at the end of this call, I did this too with grids, and I'm planning on having a grids learning lab 2 at some point next year. I got a lot of feedback that people wanted to see, even more and get even deeper. If you want to get deeper into Form Studio after today and you'd like to do that with a learning lab instead of just doing training, let me know. Your feedback is going to be important because we can definitely get deeper. Just remember right now, we're going pretty high level, getting you an understanding of what's available. And maybe at another time, we can get deeper into the how to, all that middle stuff. But right now, we'll get you that understanding of what's there. So on the user interface, we have our forms really segregated into 2 things. So for the sake of today, to make it just clear and easy to understand, we have items and we have buttons. Buttons are on the bottom of the screen here, and they move with these horizontal arrows. So like here, I have my save button highlighted. I could highlight a different button if I want to. I'll go with the save one. I can move it around with my arrows as much as I want. If I had another line here, I could just keep moving it until it goes up another line, right? That's where your buttons are. Your items are up here. Those are going to be things like your text and, actual fields of data that display up there. And you can move those with your vertical arrows up and down. And there's several different types of items. There's not really as much there for buttons. So let's talk about the types of items you have. First, we'll start with text. Pretty simple. You have text and text lookup. Now, a lot of you are probably thinking, okay, why do we really need to talk about that? Well, there's some clear use cases for both that a lot of people don't realize. So if we start with text lookup, a lot of people by default think, okay, I might as well just use text lookups, right? What a text lookup does, it adds these 3 dots, but those 3 dots allow you to query the database and, get a list and choose information from a list. So you see here, I'm on that item field. I click the 3 dots, and now I have a list of data, from a SQL query. It's just pulling that data out of my SQL database, out of my SAP system there, right? And here's all the items I have to choose from. So a lookup gives you that information, makes it readily available, and then whatever you select, let me go back to that. Whatever you select from that list passes in as text because it's a text field, right? Now that's important to note. You can scan in there, you can type in there, or you can use the lookup in this case. Now again, a lot of people by default think, okay, I might as well just use text lookup everywhere and give people that ability. Well, there's reasons why you don't want to do that, and we'll talk about that a little bit. So a regular text field is your opposite option, right? It has no lookup capability. Now a regular text field can have, it can either have information typed into it like we talked about, scanned into it, or it can automatically be fed into it. And I would say the most common uses here are both already on this form out of the box, and we'll talk about them right now. So probably the very most common, because it happens on almost every form, is something like a quantity field. There, it's a numeric field. I'm simply entering in, okay, here's the quantity I'm doing a goods receipt for, or here's the quantity I want to move, or I want to palletize, right? I'm just typing in a quantity. There's no reason to scan a barcode. Um, could I put a lookup on there and hard code that lookup to just have quantities 0 to 1,000? Sure, I could do that. Is there a use case? No, there's no point in doing that. It's not really helpful, right? So there's fields like this where it doesn't make sense to have a lookup. It doesn't really make sense to scan a barcode into it. You might have off cases where it does make sense to do one of those two things, but most cases, you just want to type in a number, right? So again, very simple here. If we simulate the form and we go through everything we have, when we get to that quantity field, all you got to do there is type, right? I say, okay, I'm doing 5, hit enter, process that, or all right, I'm doing 100, right? You just punch that in. That's a very simple text field. Then you have text fields that are for displaying data. So this text field, you're telling the system, okay, this is the quantity that I want to put into the transaction I'm doing. So you're actually telling the data telling the system a piece of information there. You're filling in data. Here we have data automatically filled in through validations. So when we select a piece of information, we talk to SAP, and SAP will tell WiSys here, okay, if I select an item, we'll go back to SAP and say, okay, we selected this item. And SAP will say, okay, here's that item's description. Here's that item's unit of measure, right? Those pieces of information are needed visually on the display there of the form. So they're filled in automatically so you can visualize that and see that on the screen. So again, if we simulate here, before we do that, you have 2 regular text fields. But in this case, we're not punching anything in. They're not enabled fields. They're not fields you're going to use and actually do something with. They fill in automatically based on the item selected, right? So the validation fills those in automatically and allows me to see that data. So that's kind of the second use case. Those are the 2 that are very common, but there is a third important case here to talk about with this stuff. And we have a form that showcases it really well. So let me show you that. So I'm going to make a copy here of one of our directed picking forms. And this is really important for showing you exactly what I'm talking about here when it comes to, okay, what's a good use case for why I don't want to give them a lookup, right? These are just important things to think about when you're looking at the user interface and making decisions based on the user interface. You always want to have that functionality in mind. So here we have this directed picking form. As you can see, pretty much the whole form is actually text fields, and there's just one lookup, right? Let's talk about why. So directed picking, you select a pick list from SAP. That pick list could have, 20 different sales orders and over 100 items on it, right? What we're doing in the background, and we won't get into all the details of how this form works right now, but essentially what this form is doing is it's going in the background and it's looking at all the sales orders on that pick list and all the items that are on those sales orders, and it's putting together the optimal pick path to make the fastest process, possible here, right? So with that, that one looks like it's been picked. Okay, so with that, to make the fastest process possible, WiSys is actually telling the employee what to do, right? We're not giving you the option in this case to pick a bin, pick an item you want to pick a sales order you want to pick from the pick list. No, we're telling you exactly where to go, what to pick, how many to pick, right? So you can see here, the first half are those fields we talked about again that automatically fill in. That happens, right? There's the data, good. But then the second half actually needs entered in, but we don't give you a lookup where we would normally give you a lookup, right? We normally give you an item, a lookup, a bin lookup. Here we want to make sure, because we're telling them what the right pick path is, we don't want to give people options. We're using this to confirm, okay, I'm in the right spot. So we're scanning or typing in to confirm that, right? So here, if I type in a different number, FD002, I'm going to get an error, haptic feedback, because that's not what I'm supposed to be doing. This is forcing me to type in the right number, right? And this is important to talk about because when it comes to text fields, people usually think lookup good, right? Because a lookup gives information, makes it easier to find what you need. But in some cases, a lookup's bad because it gives somebody the ability to cut a corner, maybe just pick something that isn't necessarily the right thing, or not really validate, right? They're not really validating they're in the right spot. They're just picking something from a list. So those are some things to keep in mind for when to use a text field or when to use a text lookup. But that's just important to talk about when we're talking about the key differences there. So now outside of the text fields, there's a couple more options for you in the item category. We have a combo box. Combo box, same functionality as a text field, right? You're passing in text there. That text might be used in the actual transaction, right? Like if this was warehouse, let's say we had 3 warehouse options. So we just want to use a drop-down box instead of actually a text lookup or having them scan or type it. We want them to use a drop-down box and pick one from the list. Then we, use that warehouse later to tell the system, okay, we're doing the goods receipt into this warehouse, right? So a combo box gives you that drop-down menu functionality, and there's 2 ways to do that. You can go to SQL, and in SQL, of course, you can do the same thing you do for a lookup. You can create a SQL query there that will define, okay, I'm going to look at all of the, well, in this case, I guess all the warehouses in the system, right? Or maybe you just want binned warehouses for goods receipt. Maybe you don't do goods receipt into a non-binned warehouse. So I'm going to do all the warehouses where bins are activated, right? So you could do something like that with SQL. Obviously, a little more goes into that. Or you could just define items here. So if I know I have 3 warehouses, I want to give them the option to pick, and it's warehouse 5, warehouse 7, and then maybe I have a production warehouse that's just called like prod, right? Those are my 3 warehouses. I can enter those in. And if I move this up the screen here and simulate, you'll just see my hard-coded list there, and I can pick an option from the list, passes it in as text, I hit enter, there you go. Now it's functioning like a text field. I have that text there, I can use that wherever I need to, but it came from a drop-down menu that's hard-coded in this case, or it could be coded using a SQL query. So that's a combo box, and then if I want to get rid of it, I just hit remove item. Remove item removes these, remove button removes a button, right? Pretty simple there. Then I have the option for a date field. So a date field here, same functionality as a combo box, as a drop-down menu, except this case, there's a clear use case, right? Text lookup, or a combo box. Those could all be mix and match, depending on what you're trying to do. Some, they all have a different use case. They could all really be used for the same scenario. It kind of comes down to user preference. But a date field, very simple here. It's a drop down, but it actually opens a calendar and you select a date from the calendar, right? So you can move around, you can click on the month and pick a different month. Gives you the ability to pick the date that you want. You hit enter. Now that text is passed in and you can pass that date field wherever you need to. But again, it's just a drop down, but it gives you a calendar in this case. Almost every time you do a date, you're going to want that unless for some reason you have a date coded into a barcode. That could be a use case where you don't use this, something along those lines, or if you want them to actually punch in the date for whatever reason. But, date field, pretty clear use case there. Okay, now this is not a functional piece, but just something to mention. You can add empty space to break it up. This is commonly used somewhere like this, where, here I select an item. I have that item information fill in automatically afterward. Maybe I want to throw in a space there to break it up on the screen, right? So when I enter in item, it's clear that I'm done with that top part of the form. So then it drops me down to the lower part. I have a space there to break it up, right? This, again, is just coming down to how do I want my user interface to look? How do I make this look as clean as possible? You have that ability to throw space in there and add that along. And then the last piece, technically it's not the same as the other items, but for today's sake, right, it's in the body. Anything in the body, we're just going to consider that an item. We're going to go with grids. So a grid here, basically going back to what we talked about with a view is different than adding a grid on a form because a view is typically used inside of another form. Something else is telling a view what to pull. In this case, we can add a grid in a form and the form you're in can tell that grid what information to pull, right? So, here I'm doing a goods receipt. Um, let's say when I select that item, maybe I want a grid to pull up at the bottom of the screen that shows all the bins that item is in and what quantity of that item is in that bin, right? So this grid could say bin, item code, quantity. And then after I selected that item, I can see everywhere where it is, and I can just walk over to one of those bins, scan the bin, type in the quantity I'm putting in it, and put it away with, more of the like items, something like that, right? Just another way to get information displayed on the screen. So that's a grid. In this case, you hit remove grid instead of remove item. And then the last piece here to talk about, a button is pretty obvious. These three are buttons, right? It's just, it does transactions. You put a button down there, you click it, and it does whatever transactions you have defined on that button. That's typically what causes things to occur in SAP is the actions on a button. Not to say you can't put those actions somewhere else, but typically it's going to be a regular button. But something a lot of people don't realize is we do have the option to do a combo button in here too. I just wanted to reference this. This is really nice for saving real estate on the screen. If you're concerned about, running out of space, maybe you have a form that has, 10 items up there you need to enter in information to. You can add a combo button here, and basically it groups any buttons you want under one button, right? So if I hit my combo button, here's my drop down menu and would have all the buttons listed. So I could add a few options here, and maybe I want one to be a print button. So I'll go here, and I'll call this print. And then maybe I want the other one. So there's my print now. And then the other one maybe is going to pull up that BOM that I said about before, right? So it's going to call a view that brings up a BOM. So I'm just going to call it BOM, hit tab. Then when I hit my drop down again, you see underneath of this, I have BOM and I have print. And if I simulate, same thing here, right? BOM and print. So a combo button is just a really easy way to save space. As a general rule of thumb, you typically don't want 3 lines of buttons. 2 is typically the max, just because it gets very crowded when you get over that 2 rows of buttons there. It gets too crowded. You want to try and keep it at 1 or 2 as a max. You don't really want to go on the 3rd line. Or if these fields are creeping all the way down, if normally you'd be fine with 2 rows, but they're all the way down here, you want to save some space, you can move that down and maybe put close underneath of that too, right? So you have your combo button here, you hit the drop down and it's close, BOM and print, something like that. But you have that option to save you some space on the screen here because of course buttons take up some room, and that's an easy way for us to customize the look and feel there. And if I want to move it, I can use these arrows here, right? And if I want to remove it, I can just hit remove button. All right. So that's the user interface stuff. Pretty self-explanatory, but there's some things that are important to note in there. Some types of fields that are not commonly used that you're really not going to see in a lot of the out-of-the-box applications. So when you get this little run through here, you get an understanding of, okay, here are some options that can, save me space or force somebody to actually validate things like that, right? Now, the last piece here, we know how to set up projects, we know how to set up a form, we know how to change the look of the actual form, what the user sees on the screen there. Again, that's all pretty easy stuff, but now we know how to do that. We can go in here, create a form, change the way it looks. The last piece is changing the way it functions. And today we'll get you a concrete understanding of how we can actually change the way a form functions and all the different ways we can make it function. So first, it's important to note when we talk about actions, actions will always be on both items and buttons on the form. So a lot of people think, okay, actions making the form do something, that's going to be on a button. I hit save, it saves it, it creates the goods receipt in SAP, right? But that's not as simple as actions are. actions are validations too. Actions are print functionality or batch creation, right? There's a ton of different actions. We're going to talk about them all here. But as I go down this list here, you see, so like here on my item field, I have 5 actions there. My warehouse field, I have 2. My bin field, I have 1. My batch field, there's actually none there. Quantity, there's going to be none. But then I have 7 here on the save button, 1 here, 1 here. When we talk about the ability of WiSys to have compounding transactions, as you can see, we have a lot of cases where there's just step by step, we have like 7, like that save button. We have 7 different actions that take place one after another whenever you hit the save button. So it's just important to remember there can be a lot of actions in the same place, and actions can be scattered all throughout all of the different components here of the form, right? So let's just go on this quantity field where there's no actions here. So we have a blank slate, and we'll talk about the different types of actions you have available. So for starters, there's quite a few that are pretty self-explanatory. I'll cover those first because we don't need a ton of detail there. You have close form. If I add that, so what would happen in this case, because I put it on quantity, as soon as I enter in a quantity, then it'll just close the form, right? So usually you want that on like a close button, but you get the point there, right? This is an action that just closes the form and takes you back to the main menu of agility. Clear form, there's 2 options under here. Clear form clears the entire form, right? So if I put this on here, when I enter in a quantity right now, what would happen is it would just clear all the fields. So it's very similar to close, except it doesn't bring you back to the main menu. It keeps you in this goods receipt form here, but all of the data would be cleared out. You'd be starting back from square one. Clear to allows me to clear to a field. So a lot of the time we have these on our save buttons, right? If I save here, I did a goods receipt for an item. Maybe we assume you're typically working in the same warehouse, or in this case, this form actually defaults to the default warehouse you have set in your agility settings. So we know warehouse will always be the same. So let's just clear it to warehouse, right? And that means it would clear all these other fields, but it won't clear warehouse, right? Or maybe I want to keep item. I want to let you go ahead and do another receipt to a different bin, but keep the same item. Then I could hit clear to item. It'll clear everything except for item in warehouse. And, you know, of course, keep that data in there so you can just quickly repeat the same transaction just to a new bin, right? So that's what a clear to does. Print document, pretty simple. This is your directory from Document Manager. If you're familiar with WiSys Document Manager, if you're not, there is another learning lab out there that goes into pretty heavy detail on Document Manager. But basically, this brings up your Document Manager directory. You go to a bin, is what I call them, right? So like here, this is all your inventory WiSys labels. Then you go to a specific inventory label you want to print. So let's say I'm printing a pick list here. You would select that and you would add that print action there. And when you enter in a quantity, in this case, it would trigger my pick list to print, right? Pretty simple there. GS1 barcode, that would actually map a GS1 barcode at the time of doing this quantity field here. So you can create your GS1 barcodes automatically. Open form, that goes back to that example I talked about with the views. You would probably put this on a button that would say view, or like that BOM example I used, and maybe the button says BOM, and it would just open up another form, right? Any of these views, whenever you select that button, it opens another form to trigger and open up inside of the original form here. And then when you close that form, it would bring you back to the original starting point. So those are some of the really simple ones. Now we'll get in a little bit deeper here into some of the more interesting ones, and I'll try and make sure I leave enough time here for some questions at the end. So serial and lot builder, this is important. I plan to do a learning lab on this in the near future. And I think I've glossed over it a little bit before, but WiSys has serial and lot builder built in. And what this does essentially is in your WiSys settings, you can set up logic to say, okay, if I'm doing a purchase order, and or a GRPO in this case, if I'm doing a goods receipt PO off of a purchase order, and I need to create a lot number for an item, I want it to automatically be created in WiSys, right? Well, it goes to SAP too, but I want WiSys to automatically create that lot number using this logic. And the logic could be something like, okay, I always give it a static 111 at the beginning, then I do item code, then I do date, and then I end it with 01 or something like that. And that's how all my batches look, right? So I can build that in my WiSys settings and serial and batch builder. And again, we'll talk about that, extensively in the future. Then I could go on here and add in the serial lot builder action. And that would tell my system here that at this point, when I enter in a quantity, I want WiSys to automatically create a batch. So, here I guess I'd say inventory transaction because I'm doing a goods receipt, not a goods receipt PO. And I want a batch. And then I'll put it into my text batch field automatically. And this would just have WiSys create that based on the rules you set in your settings. It would put it right into that field and you would have your batch created. So you could add that transaction. You can add formulas. Basically think of a formula as a conditional. So we have the ability to go in here. You could say no criteria. This is just always true. It always happens. Or you could create a criteria. So here I could say, let's say my text quantity is greater than 1 or 0. Let's say text quantity greater than 0, right? So every time I'm doing a quantity that's positive, I can make some things happen. So if it's true, I could say, I can make a calculation here. So let's say for whatever reason, I wanted to then take that text quantity and maybe I wanted to divide it by 2, right? And split that text quantity in half. I could set that roll up if I wanted to, right? I could do visibility. I could hide certain fields. So, this comes into handy for batches a lot. If I look and my batch flag says no, then I want to hide my text batch field because it's not a batch tracked item. You could change captions based on something, right? I could have the quantity caption say positive or something. I could require a text quantity to be entered in. Now, in this case, that doesn't make sense because I'm on that field, but if I pick a batch, I could require, okay, we picked a batch, there's a new batch ready to go, you have to enter in a quantity, right? Something like that. Button visibility, we can hide buttons just like we could hide fields. So, maybe I flip that logic and I say if this is false, so I hit reverse logic here, now it says false, then I'm gonna hide my save button because if it's negative, I'm not doing a goods receipt, I need to do goods issue. So I'm telling them, stop, you're in the wrong form, right? Other, I could just clear the form. If it's greater, I could just clear the whole thing and say, nope, you're done. That's not how this form's supposed to be used, even though in this case it is. Or if it's false and they enter in a negative quantity, yeah, I could just clear the whole form and say, you're doing it wrong. Start over, right? Or I could use my logic down here too and do a message. So with message types, you have 4 types you can do. An informative message doesn't stop them. It doesn't necessarily provide like a validation either. It could just pop up and say, your quantity is positive. Tells them something, they can just move on and keep going, right? I could do a hard stop. That would actually just flash at the bottom of the screen in red, and I could have it say, so let's actually reverse this here. So this would mean they put in a negative quantity. I could have it flash and say, quantity can't be negative. Use goods issue instead, right? Could do a hard message box that says the same thing, but it pops up on the screen. They actually have to acknowledge it and hit OK. Or I could do a soft box that would pop up and say, are you sure you want to do a negative receipt, which obviously we know they don't want to do, but we could say, are you sure you want to do this? And they could say yes or no, and that provides some validation there. So again, this is a conditional. If it meets the criteria, we can cause some things to happen on the form based on that criteria being met. And of course, you can put this at any stage on any field or on any button that you want based on what you're trying to get to happen. But this is very key for haptic feedback or setting some rules for how the form's going to work. Moving on, with validations, this is another key piece. So it's important to note we have a ton of pre-made validations here in the system, right? So, if I'm looking to make sure a bin exists, right, I could use this inbound validate bin and validate with SAP. Hey, they entered in bin 05-doc. Is that a real bin? SAP says, yep. All right, you're good to go. If I enter in the bin is Chase Linsenbigler, SAP says, nope, that's not a bin. It would come back and say, bin doesn't exist, whatever, right? That's validating against SAP in real time. We have the vast majority of validations that you're going to need created for you in here, and you can just use validation transaction to do so. But it's important to note if you don't see something you need in there, see the green check there on SQL event. A SQL event allows you to create your own validation. So you could go in here and in your SQL event, you could just create the validation you need. So let's say we only want to look at items that the quantity is greater than 0, because if the item's at 0, we assume we don't want to carry that anymore. We don't carry that in this warehouse anymore. I could set up that validation here with SQL and only look at items where it's greater than 0. And if there is 0 that item in this warehouse, then it'll kick back and say that item doesn't exist in the warehouse, pick a different item, right? Something like that. Ooh, let me get back to Form Studio here. So just remember, with validations, vast majority are already made for you. You can make your own with a SQL event. Something kind of similar here with agility object transactions. Again, we have a ton of transactions here already made for you that do, these are the things that do stuff in SAP or in WiSys, right? I know it's a really simple way of putting it, the things that do stuff, but when we're talking about actually creating documents or updating a document or creating a palette or something like that, this is where that's done. Agility transactions. There is a ton for you in here. Just a ton of agility transactions. You can pick whatever you need from the list, but if you can't find something that you need, you can go to new object transaction here, and you could actually find them in our DLLs a lot of the time. So this is something that's very advanced. I just wanted to bring it up though, so you're aware. You probably need our team's help to learn this stuff, right? But in our DLLs, we actually have transactions that aren't turned on in here. What's displayed here are the transactions that we have available in our out of the box stuff, pretty much. There are other transactions out there. If you talk with our team, we may be able to expose those in the DLL. So first point here, ton of transactions available already. We may still have what you're looking for in a DLL if you can't find it. So always use our help there, reach out to the team and figure out if it's available. But there are also some other ways around that. With a SQL object transaction, it's the same thing. You pick an agility transaction, but you can actually apply some SQL to it to change the functionality a bit, right? So this comes in handy a lot for something like looping. Let's say you want to loop through every item that's in a bin and you want to just take the entire contents of a bin and put it all on a pallet, right? We could use that pallet building functionality, or the add line to a floating pallet is what the action would be. And then we could loop through all the contents of that bin and add them one by one to the pallet using the SQL object transaction. So that's just taking a transaction and applying some SQL to it. Or you can use a SQL script to write a simple, update or insert or something like that to a WiSys table. You could do that with a SQL script. So, if you want to use our one of our UDFs in WSPKG, you could just write a update statement here, right, to update WSPKG and fill in that UDF with something, at this point in time. So with transactions, pretty much everything you need is going to be in agility object transactions. It's very uncommon that you have to find something that's not in there. That's pretty much going to have what you need, but some cases you might want to apply some SQL to that. You have SQL object transactions for that. Or if you just need a real simple SQL script, like you just need to update a UDF, you can use a SQL script to do that. Okay, a couple last points here, and then we're probably going to be right about time. A SQL commit, that's just valuable because it forces the SQL that's ahead of it to take place. So sometimes if you have 3 transactions up here that actually have a transaction following them that's dependent on those, you might want to put a commit in there, so maybe I have one action that creates that batch. I use that serial and batch builder. Then I want to print a label with that batch. Maybe what I would want to do there is serial and lot builder, commit, so that actually happens and that lot is created, and then print afterward, right? Because now I have that batch, now I can print it and create that. So SQL commit allows you to break some things up and actually force the SQL through. Sometimes that's really helpful for performance too. If you have a long list of compounding transactions, like 10 transactions, might be helpful to do that. And the last piece of this, these are the things that are specific to Agility 360. They do not work in Agility Mobile. That's important to note. These take advantage of the native Android capabilities. So Agility 360 can do them because it's a native Android application. We have the ability to do text to speech. You could have a specific message pop up that, it speaks it out loud, or have it read fields out loud. So you can take advantage of text to speech. Upload image and upload signature. They're very similar. These put a photo attachment, a PNG file. It would attach it to the document that's creating an SAP. So in this case, I have my goods receipt. If I do image upload, what would happen is whenever image upload occurs, it would open up the camera on the Android device. You would take a picture of the good that you're doing a receipt for on the camera, and then it would post that picture with the goods receipt it creates. Very similarly with upload signature, the only difference there is it doesn't open up the camera. It opens up a white signature box. Somebody can sign with their finger or a stylus there. You're requiring a signature to say, hey, I actually found this item. This is real. I'm signing. I'm putting my name on the line. I vouch for it. They sign that. Then whenever the goods receipt is created, again, that signature is uploaded as an image file to the goods receipt in SAP. And lastly, you have geolocation. You can take a location stamp with latitude and longitude, or you can also take a timestamp. So somebody can say, hey, at this time, I can prove I'm in the right warehouse here. Here's my latitude and longitude. I found this item, so I'm doing a goods receipt for it. Or this is commonly asked to me for sales order delivery, right? I could say, okay, I am, at the right location for the customer on time. That's all proven here because I took my geolocation. So here's my latitude, longitude, and timestamp. I'm in the right place at the right time, making my drop off. So those are all the actions that you can do. Of course, I know this session took a lot of time, as I expected. And you probably have a lot of questions. I'll try and get a couple here at the end, but you can reach out to me with them too. But just to reiterate what all we covered, again, we talked about maintaining and creating Form Studio projects and applications. Very key there. Make sure you create a custom project and make sure you create copies of any out of the box stuff that you want to change. Don't just change the out of the box stuff because you'll lose those changes as soon as you run an update. So make sure you remember to, take those right steps and always be cautious to back everything up whenever you're going in there and making tailorings, because we don't want to lose what we create, right? So take those steps, be very careful with that stuff, and just make sure you have your custom projects in there and organized. Adjusting Forms UI, we discussed those various items that make up the screen, make up the body of the screen there. You have your text and your text lookup, but you also have a combo box that allows you to take advantage of a drop down or a date field or the ability to throw a grid on there, right? A lot of different things that you can use to adjust the UI. And then we talked about all those handheld actions. Again, there's a ton there. And I hope today gave you that foundation of, all right, I know in agility, I can do a conditional to say, if this field is this, I can hide all this other stuff, or I can multiply the quantity by 2. If this field, if the unit of measure equals something, I can multiply this quantity, right? Or now you can take a transaction, you can add some SQL to it. Let's say you need to loop through several lines on a sales order or something like that. You can do that using the SQL object transaction. So hopefully you got an idea foundationally of the types of transactions available to you. So that's all I had for you. I know it's a lot to digest. Reach out to me if you have any questions. I'm looking right now. If I get any, I'll hang out for another minute or two. If I get anything in the chat, I'd love to answer it for you guys. Also, again, give me some feedback. If you want a deeper learning lab in this, it's hard for me to tell if that's too technical for a 1 hour learning lab session to go a little bit deeper, or if that's just what everybody's looking for, right? So give me some feedback. Let me know if you want to get deeper with this. I'd be more than happy to do a Form Studio 2 learning lab. And for those of you that wanted the grids or Design Studio 2 learning lab, again, I'm planning on doing something with that here in the near future. So if you want more, if you want to get deeper on this, let me know. Or if you want your own specific training, reach out to me. And, if you're a customer or a prospect, I'll get you set up with the right people. If you're a partner, we'll get something scheduled and we'll get you all the training you need on Form Studio. So thank you guys for attending. I hope you got a lot out of it. I know it was a lot, but I appreciate it. And I'll hang out for another minute or two in case there's any questions.